Was this doctor the godfather and whistleblower of the government's MKUltra mind control program? We'll find out on this week's Archive Hour. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Archive Hour. I'm Greg Malazzi, your host from the Cosmic Clock. We've got our coffee. We hope you have yours too. Our trademark seems to be working out pretty well. People seem to like that, I think. Welcome to Archive Hour. We appreciate everybody joining us and watching. As usual, to start off, please subscribe here on our YouTube as well as our Substack. That is cosmicclock.net. You'll be able to find all of our links on that site. You can subscribe here on YouTube and on Substack. As a paid subscriber, you will get access to a lot of rare and interesting information that is not available really anywhere else in the world. And that's not an exaggeration. So please subscribe. We appreciate it. We're always getting a lot of new subscribers every week, and that's very fun. So this week, happy 4th of July, everybody. That's tomorrow. I actually wasn't going to do an episode this week, but I want to keep up with it. And also, on the heels of the MKUltra House oversight hearing that happened last week, this episode is going to be about that, and basically about MKUltra, which of course was the infamous mind control program run by the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, starting in the 1950s, and some claim is still going on. I don't know if we know that for a fact, but that was certainly discussed in the hearings last week. Let me shut this off. So that being said, I made a Substack post about this already, but I figured it would be a fun Archive Hour episode as well. So as I said in that Substack post, as usual, Andrija Puharich, who seems very central to a lot of the stuff we do here at Cosmic Clock, was very involved in the MKUltra program from the earliest days. Some suspect he could have very well been the pioneer that sort of launched this entire project in 1953. And we're going to get into why that might be the case. But what's interesting about Puharich's connection to MKUltra mind control program is that he also was a whistleblower, in the sense that in 1995, well, he passed away in 1995, but in the 80s into the 90s, he really went out and lectured all over the country, actually all over the world, in different countries, about his involvement in this program and the dangers of what happened, what he claimed was continuing to happen. And as far as I know, he was really the only person who we can prove was very much involved in this program, and actually was a whistleblower in the sense that he came out and admitted that he had worked in this program, explained things he did, explained projects he was involved in, and so forth. I think people like Sidney Gottlieb, who everybody seems to know, in connection to MKUltra, of course, there was the show Wormwood on Netflix by Errol Morris, the series about this. I think Sidney Gottlieb is sort of a character in that. Of course, there's the book Poisoner in Chief by Stephen Kinzer, which is a great book that is about Sidney Gottlieb, and he did some great research there, and he spoke at this hearing last week about MKUltra, but everybody seems to know about him. There's other people involved, but Puharich was definitely involved and definitely came and spoke out after his involvement in this program, and I think was pretty brave to do that, because a lot of lectures he gave in the 80s and 90s were about things he was involved in, warning people of some of the things he knows about, and also talking a lot about things he learned in that program that could be used for positive purposes and not negative purposes. Of course, that program was really all about controlling the human mind via drugs, hypnosis, and other things. And he basically is suggesting that there are a lot of positive uses in that sense of the flip side of all of this. We're going to get into all of that. So, yeah. Anyways, this episode, again, is not going to have any physical paper archives. We have them all digitized, so we're going to look at them here. As always, I'll put up on the screen what we're looking at so we can try to describe it better. But I think what I want to do is, from what we understand, let's get into it here. Let me search something. What we like to do here on Archive Hour is, I'm actually looking up things myself in real time. For instance, I wasn't really aware of when Project MKUltra officially began, but as I'm seeing here, it began April 13th, 1953. So, April 13th, 1953 is the date that MKUltra officially started, according to Wikipedia, the internet, etc. And to start all of this, so April 13th it starts, and on July 1st, 1953, so that's 4 months, give or take, after the program officially started, there is a letter that exists. And I want to explain something now to put it out there. A lot of these letters, of course, I researched the Puharich story for over a decade, and I had a lot of help along the way from many people. One individual whose name I'm not going to mention now because I don't know if he's public about this yet. He's a very well-known person, a journalist and author, a great guy who helped me a lot. And eventually I will mention him, and I think even have him on a show because we speak often. But he helped me acquire a lot of the letters that I am going to read now and that we have, and that really paint a very clear picture of the very, very beginnings of this MKUltra program. And I am not boasting in the sense that I have these, I've made this film about Puharich, which will be coming out, but all that aside, these are very, very relevant and very important and could possibly be a huge puzzle piece into what the government now is trying to do, which is release documents, have transparency on this topic, release things, let people know things. And what we have is very, very timely. I will put it that way. And before we get into it, we're going to take a break because I need to change the battery. We'll be right back. All right, folks, we're back. Sorry about that. I'm a one-man crew here, so there's a lot to monitor. Anyways, where were we? So we're going into these letters. Oh, yeah, there's a researcher who helped me a lot here, who eventually I'm going to have on, and you'll probably know him. He's a great guy, very smart guy. So anyways, I'm going to give a shout out to him secretly now. So here's a letter that exists that is dated July 1st, 1953, and the MKUltra program, as we said earlier, officially started in April 1953. And this letter reads, sorry about that. This letter reads, this is a letter from Puharich, Andrija Puharich, to the Office of the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Washington, D.C. And of course, at the time, the head of the CIA was Allen Dulles. So this is to the Office of the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. It says, "Dear Mr. Long, thank you for your letter of June 18th, 1953. I took the liberty of reading your letter to the board of directors of our foundation, and it was their feeling that your statement therein absolved the Roundtable Foundation of my responsibility based on the previous working arrangement which I had made with you. I trust that I may have the opportunity to contact you from time to time when I am in Washington in regard to the progress of the research going on in Maine. Faithfully yours, Henry K. Puharich, Captain Medical Corps at the Army Chemical Center, which was in Fort Detrick, Maryland." So what's interesting about this letter is a couple things. And first of all, the Roundtable Foundation, for those who don't know, was a laboratory in Maine, on the coast of Maine, a town called Glen Cove. And that was a large mansion, really, that Puharich lived in. And that was his laboratory in the 1950s. There's a lot out there online about it. You can look up. But this is where he ran a lot of his psychic experiments in the early days. In fact, the foundation, Roundtable Foundation, started in 47 was when it officially started. There's a long story that we can get into another time, but essentially there's a debate about whether or not this foundation in the lab, which again was not only doing psychic experimentation, they were doing a lot of research with hallucinogenic drugs, psychoactive drugs like mushrooms. They were doing a lot of altered states of consciousness, hypnosis, research in that area as well. And so that's the Roundtable Foundation that's being referred to in this letter. So there was a debate about whether or not this foundation was privately funded by wealthy donors and people who were interested in this phenomenon, which is true to an extent. There were a lot of wealthy families at the time who were very interested in spiritualism and other things, who were very fascinated in what Puharich was doing and wanted to help him. But there was also a lot of funding that started to come in to this foundation that's proven. That funding came from the Army, the Navy, and the CIA, and other three-letter agencies as well at that time. So what's interesting about this letter in particular is that it clearly establishes Puharich was in touch directly to the office of the director of the CIA just a few months after MKUltra started. And he states, and again, quote, "based on the previous working arrangement which I had made with you." So this is sort of stating that he had already had some sort of working arrangement with the CIA. And he also says, "I trust that I may have the opportunity to contact you from time to time when I am in Washington." So this also establishes the fact that he's traveling to Washington and that he is in contact with the main office there. So this is interesting. Why? It's interesting because a lot of people out there don't think that Puharich was really that connected. They think that he was sort of this, and maybe he became this, but they think that he was sort of this outsider, almost a grifter type individual who was sort of on the outside of things, knew people, but wasn't really involved. That simply is not true. In fact, a lot of these letters and things we'll get into prove that he was very, very directly involved from the earliest days of this MKUltra program starting. There's some evidence that would point to the fact that it was actually his research that inspired the idea of mind control, of controlling a human, implanting thoughts, implanting false memories, etc., things that this program obviously set out to do. I know there's a large discussion as well about the idea of Nazi research that was exploring these things as well, that carried over into it. But it's very clear, at least in these letters and what we know, that what was going on at Puharich's Roundtable Foundation in Maine in the very years that this program started was of great interest to the architects behind MKUltra, and that Puharich himself was in fact directly in contact with them, and his lab was being visited by people in these agencies, which we can get into as well. So that's the first letter here, which we just read. And here's what's interesting is that somebody could say, well, anyone could have sent a letter at that time, big deal. But the next letter we're looking at here, the letterhead on it is the Central Intelligence Agency, Office of the Director, Washington, D.C. This is a response to Andrija Puharich's letter. This is dated, let me see here. This is dated June 18th, and Puharich's letter was July 1st. Okay, so this letter came before Puharich's letter. Oh, interesting. Okay, so this one reads here. This says, okay, sorry, again, these letters are faded, so they're a bit hard to read. I was trying to double check that date. But this letter here says, Dear Dr. Puharich, I am sorry to be so slow in answering your letter of May 30th. I find, however, that the reports which you sent in have raised some questions, both practical and theoretical, in the minds of some of our people, upon which they find they must develop answers before they check further with you. I recognize the problem of timing which confronts you at the beginning of a fiscal year, and I would therefore suggest that you should go ahead with whatever plans you would normally make without any assumption that we will display a serious degree of interest in your research for the coming year. I hope that we will be in a position later in the year, however, to follow up the contact which we have so far established. With kindest personal regards, Robert Long, Assistant to the Director of the CIA. So that's interesting because obviously what this is saying is that they have interest in his work and what he's doing, but it seems as though at the beginning of their fiscal year, they would like to check into some things further before basically giving his foundation a grant or money. But we know that they eventually did, and we're going to get into that. But what these letters establish is just the idea that within months, a few months of the whole MKUltra program starting, Puharich was in touch with the CIA directly and was writing letters to them and receiving letters from them. So that is interesting. So, take a little coffee break here. So what we're going to get into here, again, the unnamed researcher I've brought up who has assisted me with this particular part of the work I've done in this area, what he helped me obtain were not only letters and correspondence like we just read, but there were also journals of Puharich's that were typed out. And what they seem to be are sort of a day-to-day outline of what he was doing, who he was dealing with, people he was meeting, where he was going. He kept journals meticulously throughout his whole life. So that's not strange to me, but a lot of these do definitely seem to try to capture his early years in being involved in all this, I think, as a way to keep track, to keep a record. We can get into this in maybe another episode, but let's just say he speaks pretty clearly later in life as to why he kept very meticulous journals at this time, but there's a lot of journals. We're going to only read some of them because there's literally hundreds of pages of these, but there's some that I picked out that are more important to what we're trying to establish here. And to start, here's a letter, or I'm sorry, a journal, and it reads, On December 23rd, 1953, came to the first inkling of the intentions of the U.S. Army and government in relation to the Roundtable Foundation findings on extrasensory perception that had been turned over to its agencies 1 year ago. One of the curious aspects of Puharich's practice of medicine at the Army Chemical Center was that he had a long list of ACC, which stands for Army Chemical Center, VIPs as patients, none of whom had ever really been sick, or if they were, it was some minor condition that was of long standing. These patients seemed more interested in seeing the captain than in being seen. So a kind of game went on. If a patient came in with a hemorrhoid, Puharich insisted on putting him on the table and performing surgery on the spot. If a patient came in with a foolish question about an exposure to mumps, Puharich promptly insisted on a 5 cc shot of gamma globulin in the buttock. On December 23rd, Major Harry Davis came in with an obscure complaint and was promptly given treatment with a 20-gauge needle. He took no umbrage, however, and began to chat about extrasensory perception. First, he suggested that Puharich might be transferred to the medical laboratories shortly. Then he volunteered some technical information which sounded like an echo of General Souzet. The essence of it was that a program for ESP research had been in the planning here at Army Chemical Center for about a year, that a German scientist was coming here to work at the problem, but that it had been difficult to get a security clearance for him and that this was an irritating cause of delay. He spoke quite knowingly about charged cages and end of letter. Charged cages, of course, were Puharich's experiments with the Faraday cage, where he used a certain electrical charge around the cage with somebody inside of that cage, which he claimed enhanced their ESP abilities. So what's interesting about this letter? First of all, Puharich, what he's saying here is the fact that, and he talks about this a lot, you know, he was sort of a normal medical doctor at one point at the Army Chemical Center, and he's suggesting that people would kind of show up with non-problems and fake medical issues and just to see him because he was so interesting and they wanted to speak with him about ESP. So they would kind of say, hey, I've got a headache, I got to go see this doctor. And they'd show up and just chat with him about ESP because it was the only way really they could see him and chat with him about this. So he's suggesting that there was serious interest in this at the time. And what's even more interesting is the fact that he says here, the essence of it was that a program for ESP research had been in the planning here at ACC, Army Chemical Center, for about a year, that a German scientist was coming here to work at the problem. That's very interesting. That gets into the Project Paperclip realm, which is interesting to look into, too much to get into here now, but it was essentially the Nazi doctors after the war that would come to the U.S. and work on certain things. And I know that there's ideas that they were involved in early MKUltra research as well. But the other thing, too, is there's a lot of speculation out there for people interested in this stuff of this confession Puharich made later in his life. And that was this idea that there was a legitimate ESP research program within the Army called Project Penguin. Pardon me. And that he suggests that this was a legitimate program set up in the Army and also in the Navy, and that this was a funded program which was using psychics, psychic warfare, all this stuff. This has been debated for years and years. There seems to be no documentation that anyone's found that proves this existed. I know some people say there really was a Project Pelican back then that was some loosely tied into mind control programs. So some people suggest in his later years, Puharich slipped up and said Pelican instead of, he said penguin instead of pelican. That's totally plausible. But whatever the case, I'm sorry, hold on here. I'm in the middle of a lot of stuff. I apologize. This is what the archive hour is. It's real time. We're talking. So anyways, what's interesting again is whether or not this Project Penguin really existed, this Army Navy ESP program. He's claiming that there was interest in the Army Chemical Center and the Army in general in ESP and the work he was doing and in the Faraday cage experiments that he did for a long time, which again, he claimed enhanced an ordinary person's ESP. Sorry about that. So that's the first journal entry. The second journal entry here, this is another interesting one. This is dated April 15th, 1954. And I will read this one. April 15th, 1954. I called on Dr. Wilson Green today, the scientific director of the Chemical and Radiological Laboratories at the Army Chemical Center. He was most cordial and friendly in his manner. I told him why I was here to see him and frankly stated that I didn't expect to get very far since I was not cleared. We entered, however, rather easily into a discussion of the chemical aspect of psi phenomenon. I gave him a brief background of my research and of my dealings with the military. He told me that they had a psychochemical research program. He mentioned the study of glutamic acid, lysergic acid, LSD, of course, and Dr. Wrinkle's work on LSD number 25. Dr. Wrinkle, by the way, was apparently somebody very, very involved in LSD research in the early days in the Army Chemical Center, who Puharich writes a lot about and was very friendly with him and was a colleague of his. So he says, Dr. Wrinkle's work on LSD number 25 and the background of Stoll's interest in the matter. So what's interesting in all of this and in Archive Hour in general, what we like to do, there's a lot of names in here who are sort of referenced that I can't pinpoint to anywhere else. I don't know who they are. Of course, I've Googled people, but you out there, anyone interested in this stuff can kind of help with this puzzle of saying, okay, Stoll, S-T-O-L-L. I don't recall recently looking into that name, but it could be somebody very important in all this history. So we can look into that. So he said, I informed him that I knew of Dr. Wrinkle's work and had in fact brought it to the attention of the psi warfare people in Washington about 18 months ago. He seemed surprised at this knowledge. Our discussion covered some occult matters that had come to his attention and other phases of the role of drugs and chemicals in altering the states of consciousness. Dr. Green then said that the first thing that must be done is to get me top secret clearance because there were a lot of things that we could talk about if I were cleared. He suggested that I come back and talk to Dr. Butler, again a name, Dr. Butler, who is in charge of this particular program. He further said that he would try to collect some reading material for me so that I could familiarize myself with some of the literature. This conference lasted from 1,300 to 1,400 hours. So that is an interesting letter. And there's a few reasons why that is interesting. I'm bringing something up here. So, firstly, they're talking a lot about LSD. If you look up a gentleman named L. Wilson Green, he was a technical director of the chemical and radiological laboratories at the Army Chemical Center. And as soon as you look up his name, there's so much about him in connection to Allen Dulles, to Edgewood at the time, the Army base doing MKUltra drug research. So first of all, that connects Puharich to him. And secondly, what's very interesting about this is that Puharich says, I brought it to the attention of the psi warfare people in Washington about 18 months ago. So that kind of proves that there was some serious interest in psychic warfare back then at an official level. And I guess the most interesting thing here is he says, Dr. Green then said the first thing that must be done is get me top secret clearance. So I guess people could speculate, well, again, Puharich is some guys in the Army. He probably never got that top secret clearance. What does he really know? He's just this outsider, etc. Well, what we like to do on Archive Hour is to prove things to you. And that is what we will do. Hold on. So, that letter we just read was dated April 15th, 1954. Here is a letter from October 4th, 1954. And this says, subject, access to information regarding the treatment of CW casualties. And that means, I just looked this up the other day. I was talking to somebody. CW casualties, hold on a second. I just looked this up. I'm sorry. Okay. In the context of chemical warfare, CW casualties refers to CW casualties are military or civilian personnel injured by toxic agents. The U.S. Army manages these medical emergencies through strict casual triage. Basically, these are people who have been affected by some sort of toxic agent, which is interesting. So again, this letter is titled Access to Information Regarding the Treatment of CW Casualties. It came from Post Surgeon Station Dispensary, Army Chemical Center, Maryland, to Captain Henry K. Puharich, Station Dispensary, Army Chemical Center. Again, I've probably said this before, and it's confusing. I apologize. Henry Puharich is the name he went by when he was younger. And at some point in the 60s, he changed his name to Andrija, which was his original Croatian name. I think the story is because his parents were Croatian immigrants. He was Croatian. When they moved to the United States, his parents wanted him to have an American-sounding name. He went by Henry, but he eventually adopted back his name, Andrija. But some people still called him Henry. Some people called him Hank, which is short for Henry. So you see a lot of letters where people are referring to him as Hank. So anyways, that's a little background there. So here's the letter from the post surgeon to Puharich, and it says, information available to this activity reveals that Captain Puharich was recently granted clearance for access to secret information. Accordingly, Captain Puharich is cordially invited to attend any classified or unclassified conferences or meetings at the Chemical Center medical laboratories that would be of interest or assistance in the treatment of CW casualties. And this is a letter from Norman W. Elton, Colonel. And once again, if you Google him, he was high up in the Army Chemical Center. So why is that important? Well, it's important because it pretty much proves that Puharich, this letter is sort of claiming that this might be hard. Some of this might be hard for him to be involved with because he did not have top secret clearance yet. A couple months later, he's granted top secret clearance. So there you go. So to backtrack a bit here, we're basically painting this picture of Puharich's early years at the Army Chemical Center and how he was right there on the ground floor when all of this MKUltra research started. Pardon me. He's exchanging letters with the office of the head of the CIA, Allen Dulles. He's exchanging letters with some of the highest up colonels involved in the Army Chemical Center who were ultimately involved in starting this MKUltra program. So there's a lot of, pieces that come together here in these early letters that are very interesting to get into. As I stated earlier, there's so many letters here. I mean, geez, I'm looking through through so many here, and so we'll probably do a part 2 on this because I don't have a lot of time today to do it. But we'll probably do a part 2. But so I sort of singled out those first few I read because I think they're the most important. The important letters and journals that kind of set the scene here to Puharich's involvement in MKUltra. And I'm going to get into some more correspondence here. What's interesting here is that here is a letter. Keep in mind, as you saw me do, I looked up the official start date of MKUltra, which I believe is April 13th, 1953. What we have here is a letter from December 19th, 1952. So this would have been before the program even officially started. And this is a letter from the Department of the Army, Office of the Chief of Psychological Warfare, Washington, D.C. And it says, "Dear Dr. Puharich, Colonel Stanley informed me," and I actually know Colonel Stanley was the head of psychological warfare in the Department of the Army. We can talk about that later, but this says, "Dear Dr. Puharich, Colonel Stanley informed me that you had been here on a short visit since we last talked together. I am sorry I missed you because our earlier discussions on, quote, a new type of experiment in parapsychology, end quote, were quite stimulating. I have taken the liberty of forwarding your preliminary report on parapsychology to the Psychological Warfare Division of our Human Resources Research Office at George Washington University. As you know, should the Army find a use for this experimentation, and if the Army were to participate in any way involving financial support, such a contract would be let through one of the contracting agencies. I have found the reading of your report most interesting since I am familiar with the Duke research effort along these same lines." Of course, he's referring to Duke University ESP research that was happening back then. "I am an alumnus of Johns Hopkins. My former graduate training at Hopkins and also at the University of Pennsylvania was all along the lines of, quote, this is a fake. It has to be a fake. No one has ever actually proven the case for extrasensory perception, end quote. However, if one has a scientific attitude about new approaches to knotty problems, then the obvious conclusion is, can Dr. Puharich and his associates demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that people do possess extrasensory faculties? From the data presented in your preliminary report, obviously there is evidence that such a faculty does exist and has been demonstrated, which is outside the normal 5 senses. As you know from our discussions, our real problem is, how can such a faculty be exploited by the Army? Frankly, I don't know, but I am perfectly willing to study the problem further and make every effort to see if the Army has a need for such experimentation. As I mentioned above, our normal procedure is to raise the following questions with a research organization on a preliminary and experimentary basis." Wow. So that was interesting because, A, that letter was written in December 52, before the MKUltra program started, and it's showing very, very clear interest in Puharich's parapsychology and ESP research. And what I think is most important here is the fact that who wrote this letter, the person who wrote this letter, which unfortunately, oddly enough, the name of the person this letter came from is cut off on the bottom. So that's just makes more of a mystery out of all this. I don't know who this letter came from, but what's most interesting here is that he's clearly sort of stating he believes in this stuff, that Puharich can kind of prove it, and that they're pretty serious about moving forward with a legitimate program within the Army Psychological Warfare Department to research ESP. That's very interesting because I think there's a lot of, again, debate out there about this kind of thing not ever happening, and that this just wasn't a thing, was never taken seriously. A lot of skeptics take that stance, but we're kind of seeing a very real picture here of the interest that was coming from the Psychological Warfare Department. And what's also interesting here, just in general, is the fact that MKUltra, of course, was a mind control program, and ESP, in a way, if you think about it, is kind of mind control in the sense that, as Puharich puts it, the mind is kind of being taken over. I mean, of course, with his channeling research, whether you want to call that all a psyop or that it was real, but essentially the mind and the body is kind of being taken over by some other entity. And, in a way, a lot of ESP stuff, you can see why it makes sense, is kind of put together with the psychological warfare, ESP, mind control. It's all kind of in the same soup, if you will. And so you can clearly see that coming together in these very early years of the MKUltra program. Again, this letter is from before the program started. So that establishes the interest and the communication with Puharich by these people before the program even officially started. So that is very interesting. Oh, actually, I take back what I said, because this next letter is from the same person as the first letter, and now we know who wrote the letter. So this letter is actually, so this is dated December 19th, 1952. It's the same day. I'm sorry, this is the second page of the first letter I just read. My apologies. This says, Dr. Henry K. Puharich, A, is such a research venture feasible? B, have we problems which lend themselves to this particular technique? C, is this a worthwhile expenditure of funds in view of existing priorities? D, what end results might we expect? These questions are logical ones and, of course, need some consideration prior to any formal commitment on our part. The best procedure now seems to be that someone from this office and a representative of HUMRO, that is a lowercase HUM, uppercase RRO, visit with you sometime during January for the purpose of reviewing your methodology, techniques, etc., and determining the feasibility of such a venture. I thoroughly enjoyed talking with you, and I hope we will have the pleasure of continuing our conversations at a further convenient date during the latter part of January. Kindest personal regards and best wishes for the holiday season. Sincerely, C.D. Leatherman, Chief Research Branch. P.S. Colonel Stanley is out of the city for a few days, and I am taking the liberty of writing you in his absence. So, what's interesting about that is they're clearly saying they're going to send a representative to visit him in 1952, again, before the program officially started. We're going to take a quick break. All right, everybody, we're back. There's a lot to get into here, as you can tell. There's hundreds of documents, and unfortunately, I got to have a quick archive hour recording today. I'm a little busy, so I'm going to sign off. But obviously, this is going to require a second part, so that's what we'll do next time. As always, appreciate you watching. Please subscribe to YouTube and to our Substack. All the links are in the bio, cosmicclock.net. We really appreciate it. As I said, we're getting a lot of new subscribers, which is very fun, very encouraging. So, yeah, appreciate it a lot. Have a great 4th of July. Signing off here, Archive Hour. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.